The rope around Eliza Monroe's wrists bit into her skin as her brother Caleb shoved her toward the wooden platform where cattle usually stood, and she knew in that moment that the fever that had taken their parents 3 months ago had taken something essential from him too. The livestock auction in Cripple Creek, Colorado, on this sweltering July afternoon in 1878 smelled of manure and sweat and desperation. Eliza's 21 years of life had been hard, but nothing had prepared her for this. The crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters gathering around the platform looked at her with expressions ranging from pity to something that made her stomach turn. "What the hell are you doing, Caleb?" she hissed, trying to keep her voice low even as panic clawed at her throat. Her auburn hair, usually pinned neatly, had come loose during the struggle, falling in waves around her shoulders. Her simple cotton dress was torn at the hem. Caleb's face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot. At 23, he looked 10 years older, worn down by grief and the gambling debts he'd accumulated in the months since they'd buried their parents. "Shut your mouth, Eliza. I owe money to men who'll kill me if I don't pay. You're worth something, at least." The auctioneer, a portly man named Henderson, looked uncomfortable. "Now, Caleb, I don't know about this. This ain't right, selling your sister like she's a mule." "She's of age, and I'm head of the family now," Caleb said, his voice hard. "Our parents left debts. I got debts. She'll fetch enough to clear them, and whoever buys her gets a worker. A wife, if they want. I don't care." Eliza felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She scanned the crowd, looking for anyone who might help, but most men avoided her gaze. Those who didn't looked at her in ways that made her want to disappear. Then she saw him. He stood at the back of the crowd, a head taller than most men there, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun from the people behind him. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders, and his beard was trimmed close to his jaw. He wore buckskin pants and a simple cotton shirt that strained across muscles built from years of hard living in the mountains. His eyes, even from a distance, were an intense blue-gray, and they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Henderson cleared his throat, looking miserable. "Folks, we got here Miss Eliza Monroe. She's a good worker, can cook and clean, and, well," he trailed off, clearly hating every word. "$20, someone called out. It was a grizzled miner Eliza recognized from town, a man known for beating his last wife to death. "25, said another voice, this one belonging to a rancher whose breath always smelled of whiskey. Eliza's heart hammered. This couldn't be happening. She pulled at the ropes, but Caleb had tied them tight. "30, said the miner, grinning now. Then the big man at the back of the crowd moved forward, his stride purposeful. The crowd parted for him instinctively. When he reached the front, he looked up at Henderson, then at Caleb, and finally at Eliza. His gaze softened for just a moment when their eyes met. "What's the highest bid?" His voice was deep, rough like gravel, but there was something steady in it. $30, Henderson said. 60, the stranger said flatly. The crowd murmured. Caleb's eyes lit up with greedy excitement. $60, the miner protested. That's crazy money for a woman. The stranger turned to look at him, and something in his expression made the miner take a step back. "You got a problem with how I spend my money?" The miner shook his head quickly. Henderson looked around. "Any other bids?" When no one spoke, he nodded. "Sold to—" he paused. "What's your name, mister?" "Isaiah Hart." "Sold to Isaiah Hart for $60. Isaiah pulled a leather pouch from his belt and counted out the money with steady hands. Caleb practically lunged forward to take it, his hands shaking as he shoved the coins into his own pockets. Isaiah climbed up onto the platform with an ease that spoke of strength and moved toward Eliza. She tensed, unsure whether this was better or worse than her other options. He pulled a knife from his belt, and she flinched. "Easy," he said softly, his voice gentle now. "I'm just cutting the ropes." He sliced through the bindings quickly, and Eliza rubbed her wrists, feeling blood flow back into her hands. She looked up at him, trying to understand his intentions, but his face was unreadable. Isaiah turned to face Caleb, who was still grinning at his windfall. The mountain man's expression darkened. "You just sold your own sister." Caleb shrugged, pocketing the last of the coins. "Business is business. She'll be better off anyway, with someone who can afford to feed her." Isaiah's jaw clenched. You're a coward and a disgrace. He took a step closer to Caleb, and despite being roughly the same age, the difference between them was stark. Isaiah was solid muscle and controlled power, while Caleb was soft and weak. If I ever see you near her again, if you ever come looking for more money, if you even speak her name, I'll make sure you regret it. You understand me? Caleb's grin faltered. You can't threaten me. She's yours now. The transaction's done. In one swift motion, Isaiah grabbed the front of Caleb's shirt and lifted him onto his toes. The crowd went silent. I paid double what anyone else would have because I wanted to make sure a piece of filth like you didn't get her. Now take your money and run. Get out of Colorado, because if you're still here when I come back to town, I won't be so generous. He released Caleb, who stumbled backward, nearly falling off the platform. For a moment, Eliza thought her brother might protest, might try to assert some kind of authority. But then he looked into Isaiah's eyes, and whatever he saw there made him go pale. Fine, Caleb muttered. She's your problem now. He scrambled off the platform and pushed through the crowd, practically running. Eliza watched him go, feeling a confusing mixture of relief and grief. He was her only family, and he'd just sold her, and now he was leaving without a backward glance. Isaiah turned to her, his expression softening again. Can you walk? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then let's get out of here. He didn't touch her, didn't try to take her arm or guide her. He just started walking toward the edge of town, and after a moment's hesitation, Eliza followed. What choice did she have? They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Cripple Creek. The town was bustling with miners and prospectors, all chasing the promise of gold and silver in the mountains. Eliza had lived here her whole life, in a small cabin her father had built. That cabin was gone now, sold to pay some of Caleb's debts. At the edge of town, a massive gray horse waited, tied to a post. The animal was as impressive as its owner, standing at least 17 hands high with an intelligent gleam in its dark eyes. Isaiah untied the horse and then turned to Eliza. You ever ridden before? Yes, she said quietly. We had a horse before. She didn't finish the sentence. He nodded. This is Ash. He's steady. I'm going to put you on him, and then I'm going to lead us out of town. We'll talk when we're away from here. That all right with you? The fact that he was asking her permission for anything seemed absurd given that he'd just bought her, but Eliza nodded. Isaiah put his hands on her waist, his touch firm but not rough, and lifted her onto the horse as if she weighed nothing. Then he took Ash's reins and started walking. They headed west, toward the mountains that loomed in the distance. The Rockies were purple and gray against the afternoon sky, their peaks still holding snow even in July. Eliza had never been into the high country. Her life had been confined to the town and the small homestead her family had worked. After about an hour of walking, when Cripple Creek was far behind them and they were alone on a narrow mountain trail, Isaiah finally spoke. I'm going to stop here for a minute. We need to talk. He found a spot where a fallen log made a natural bench and tied Ash to a nearby pine tree. Then he looked up at Eliza, still sitting on the horse. Do you want to come down? She did, but she wasn't sure she could trust her legs. Isaiah seemed to sense this and reached up, helping her slide down from the saddle. Her legs were shaky, and he kept his hands on her arms until she was steady. Sit, he said, gesturing to the log. Eliza sat, and Isaiah remained standing, putting some distance between them. He crossed his arms over his broad chest and looked at her seriously. I'm not going to hurt you, he said bluntly. I didn't buy you to use you or abuse you. I bought you because if I hadn't, someone else would have, and I saw what kind of men were bidding. Eliza stared at him, trying to process his words. Then why did you pay so much? To make sure I won, and to have enough leverage to scare your brother off. His expression darkened. What kind of man sells his own sister? One who's lost everything, Eliza said softly, though she didn't know why she was defending Caleb. We lost our parents to fever this spring. Caleb couldn't handle it. He started gambling, drinking. The debts piled up. That's no excuse. I know. Eliza looked down at her hands, at the rope burns on her wrists. What happens now? What do you want from me? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. I live up in the mountains, about 2 days' ride from here. I have a cabin, trap animals for fur, hunt for meat. I trade with the Ute sometimes, and I come down to Cripple Creek or Lidville a few times a year for supplies. It's a hard life, but it's honest. And you want me to, what, keep house for you? I want you to be safe, he said simply. Beyond that, I haven't thought much about it. I didn't plan on buying anyone today. I came down to trade furs and get supplies, but when I saw what was happening, I couldn't walk away. Eliza looked up at him, really looked at him. His face was weathered, with small lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. There was a scar on his left cheek, thin and white, but his eyes were kind, and his mouth, when it wasn't set in a grim line, looked like it might smile easily. "How old are you?" she asked. 26. "And you live alone in the mountains?" "I do. Have for about 6 years now since my father died. He was a trapper too. Taught me everything." "What about your mother?" "She died when I was born." He said it matter-of-factly, without emotion. "It was just me and my pa." "I'm sorry." Isaiah shrugged. "It was a long time ago." He looked at her searchingly. "What about you? What's your story besides having a worthless brother?" Eliza found herself talking, the words spilling out. She told him about growing up in Cripple Creek, about her father's work as a carpenter and her mother's vegetable garden. She told him about the fever that had swept through town, how it had taken her parents within a week of each other, how Caleb had promised to take care of her, to protect her, and then had spiraled into drink and gambling instead. "He wasn't always like this," she said. "When we were children, he was kind. He looked out for me." "People change," Isaiah said. "Usually when things get hard, you see who they really are." "And who are you really?" Eliza asked boldly. Isaiah considered the question. "I'm someone who values honesty and hard work. I don't have much, but what I have is mine, earned fair. I don't tolerate cruelty, and I don't walk away when someone needs help." He paused. "I'm also someone who doesn't know how to live with another person. I've been alone for a long time." "So have I," Eliza said softly. "Even when Caleb was there, I was alone." They looked at each other, and something passed between them, an understanding maybe. They were both solitary creatures, both marked by loss. "We should keep moving," Isaiah said finally. "We can make it to a good camping spot before dark. There's a stream there, and you can clean up if you want. Tomorrow we'll start the real climb into the mountains." They traveled for another few hours, with Eliza back on Ash and Isaiah leading the way on foot. The trail grew steeper, the air cooler. Pine trees crowded close, and Eliza could hear the sound of rushing water long before they reached the stream. The camping spot Isaiah had mentioned was a small clearing beside a fast-moving creek. The water was crystal clear, running over smooth stones, and the grass was thick and green. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Isaiah helped Eliza down from the horse and then set about making camp with efficient, practiced movements. He unsaddled Ash and rubbed the horse down, then hobbled him so he could graze. He gathered firewood and built a fire ring with stones from the creek. Within what seemed like minutes, he had a fire going and was pulling supplies from his saddlebags. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Eliza realized she was starving. She'd been too nervous to eat that morning, and it was now evening. "Yes." Isaiah produced strips of dried venison and some hardtack. It wasn't fancy, but it was food. They sat on opposite sides of the fire and ate in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. "Are you cold?" Isaiah asked, noticing Eliza shiver. "A little." He pulled a thick wool blanket from his pack and brought it around to her side of the fire, draping it over her shoulders. His hands didn't linger, and he quickly returned to his spot. "Isaiah," Eliza said after a while, "why did you really help me?" He stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "My mother died because no one helped her. She was giving birth, and my father was out trapping, and there was no one around. By the time he got back, it was too late. He told me that story over and over, said it was the biggest regret of his life that he wasn't there." Isaiah looked up at her. "I guess I learned early that you help people when you can, because you never know when it might matter. Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was." Isaiah smiled slightly, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "Stubborn as hell, tough as nails, but good." You look like him when you smile, Eliza said, then blushed, surprised at her own boldness. Isaiah's smile widened. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He laid out another blanket for her, creating a makeshift bed near the fire, but not too close. Then he settled on the other side of the fire with his own blanket. Eliza noticed he kept his rifle close. Are we safe out here? She asked. Safe enough. I'm a light sleeper, and Ash will make noise if anything big comes around. Eliza lay down, pulling the blanket tight around herself. The ground was hard, and every sound seemed magnified. But she was exhausted, and eventually, despite everything, she fell asleep. She woke once in the night, disoriented. The fire had burned down to embers, and the darkness was complete. She could hear Isaiah's steady breathing from across the clearing and found it oddly comforting. She fell back asleep, thinking that whatever else Isaiah Hart might be, he was a man of his word. He'd promised she'd be safe, and she believed him. The next morning, Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and frying fish. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and saw Isaiah crouched by the fire, tending to a pan. He looked over and nodded. Morning, caught some trout from the creek. You want some? Please. They ate breakfast as the sun rose over the mountains, turning everything golden. Isaiah explained the route they'd be taking, pointing out landmarks. We'll follow this creek for most of the morning, then we'll head up over that ridge. By evening, we'll be at my cabin. Is it far from other people? Very far. The nearest neighbor is probably a day's ride, but the Ute have a camp about half a day's ride to the north. Good people. I trade with them regular. After breakfast, they broke camp. Isaiah moved with the same efficient precision, leaving no trace they'd been there except for the fire ring. He lifted Eliza onto Ash again, and they started the second day of their journey. The climbing was steeper now, and the air was thinner. Eliza found herself breathing harder, and her head felt light. Isaiah noticed and called for frequent stops to let her rest and drink water from the creek. It takes time to get used to the altitude, he explained. You'll adjust. As they climbed, the landscape changed. The pine trees gave way to aspen groves, their white bark stark against the green of their leaves. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors, purples and yellows and reds. Eliza saw a deer watching them from a distance, its ears twitching. Hawks circled overhead. It's beautiful, she said. Isaiah looked around as if seeing it through her eyes. I forget sometimes, being up here all the time. But yeah, it is. They stopped for a midday meal beside a high mountain lake. The water was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the peaks reflected in its surface like a mirror. Eliza walked to the edge and looked down into the clear water. She could see fish darting below. Is it always this peaceful? She asked. Mostly. Winters can be hard. The snow gets deep and you can be snowed in for weeks at a time. But there's a beauty to that too, in its own way. Aren't you lonely? Isaiah considered the question. Sometimes, but I've got Ash, and I like the quiet. People are complicated. Animals and mountains are simple. And now you have me, Eliza said, voicing the thought that had been nagging at her. Doesn't that make things complicated? Probably, Isaiah admitted. He looked at her directly. But it was the right thing to do. I'll figure out the rest. They continued climbing, and as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, they crested a ridge. Below them, in a small valley surrounded by mountains, was a cabin. It was made of logs, solid and well built, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. There was a corral for Ash and a small shed that probably held supplies. That's home, Isaiah said. He led them down into the valley. Up close, the cabin was even more impressive. It wasn't large, but it was clearly built with skill and care. The logs were tightly fitted, the roof was solid, and there were real glass windows. Did you build this? Eliza asked. My father built most of it. I've added to it over the years. Isaiah opened the door and gestured for Eliza to enter first. Inside it was dim but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves holding supplies. A ladder led up to a loft. Through a doorway, Eliza could see a smaller room with a bed. That's my room, Isaiah said, following her gaze. The loft has a bed too. That can be yours. Eliza climbed the ladder and found a small but cozy space under the eaves. There was a bed with a real mattress, a trunk, and a small window that looked out over the valley. This is more than I expected, she admitted, climbing back down. Isaiah looked almost embarrassed. I know it's not fancy. It's wonderful, Eliza said honestly, and it was. After the terror of the auction, after the uncertainty of the journey, this sturdy cabin in the mountains felt like a sanctuary. Isaiah showed her around the rest of the cabin, explaining where things were. There was a well just outside for water and a smokehouse for preserving meat. The shed held tools and traps and supplies. I'll need to head out for a few days next week to check my trap lines, Isaiah explained. But for now, we'll get you settled. You can rest, get used to the altitude. If you want to help with chores, that's fine, but you don't have to. I want to help, Eliza said firmly. I'm not afraid of work. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Isaiah showed Eliza how things worked in the cabin. She took over the cooking, which he seemed grateful for, and she cleaned and organized. Isaiah spent his days working on repairs, hunting, and starting to teach Eliza about the land around them. He showed her which plants were edible and which were poisonous. He taught her to identify animal tracks in the soft earth. He took her to a small garden plot near the cabin and explained that his father had started it years ago. It's hard to grow much up here, he said, but potatoes and carrots do all right. Some herbs, too. Eliza found herself relaxing for the first time in months. There was something healing about the rhythm of the days, the simplicity of the work. And Isaiah was easy to be around. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was thoughtful. He never made her feel like a burden or like he expected anything from her. One evening, about a week after they'd arrived, they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. The sky was a riot of color and the air was crisp and clean. Isaiah, Eliza said, I need to thank you for what you did, for bringing me here. He looked uncomfortable. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved my life. You gave me a home. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Isaiah turned to look at her, his blue-gray eyes serious. You don't owe me anything, Eliza. You're not my servant, and you're not my property, no matter what that auction suggested. You're here because I couldn't let those men get you. But you're free to leave whenever you want. Leave? Eliza was shocked. And go where? Anywhere. I could take you to Leadville or Denver. You could start fresh. I don't want to leave, Eliza said quietly. Unless you want me to. I don't. Isaiah said it quickly, then looked away as if embarrassed by his vehemence. I mean, you're welcome to stay as long as you like. Eliza studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell past his shoulders. She realized with a start that she was attracted to him. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he was. It was the way he moved with such confidence, the gentleness in his hands despite his size, the quiet strength that radiated from him. Then I'll stay, she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, until the sky was full of them. Eliza had never seen so many stars. In town, there had always been lights and smoke obscuring them. But here, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. It's incredible, she whispered. Yeah, Isaiah agreed, but when Eliza glanced at him, he wasn't looking at the stars. He was looking at her. Their eyes met and something electric passed between them. For a moment, Eliza thought he might say something, might reach for her. But then he stood abruptly. We should get inside. It gets cold fast once the sun's down. The moment was broken, but as Eliza followed him inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The days turned into weeks, and summer began to fade toward autumn. The aspen leaves started to turn gold, and there was a new crispness in the morning air. Eliza learned more about mountain life, becoming comfortable with tasks she'd never imagined doing. Isaiah taught her to fish in the streams, to identify animal tracks, and even how to shoot his rifle. You need to know how to protect yourself, he'd said seriously, if something happens to me, or if you're alone and a bear comes around. Eliza had been nervous at first, but Isaiah was a patient teacher. They spent an afternoon at a makeshift range he set up, and by the end of it, she could hit a target more often than not. You're a natural, Isaiah said, approval clear in his voice. The praise made Eliza's heart flutter in a way she was becoming increasingly familiar with. She was falling for Isaiah Hart, she realized. Maybe she'd been falling for him since that first moment in Cripple Creek, when he'd stepped forward to protect her. But it was more than gratitude now. It was the way he laughed at her jokes, rare but genuine. It was the care he took to make sure she was comfortable and safe. It was the respect he showed her, treating her as an equal rather than a burden. But Isaiah kept a careful distance. He never touched her unnecessarily, never let conversations get too personal. It was as if he'd drawn an invisible line between them and was determined not to cross it. One afternoon in mid-September, they were working together in the garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost. Eliza was pulling up potatoes while Isaiah dug carrots. The work was peaceful, companionable. "Isaiah," Eliza said, breaking the silence, "can I ask you something personal?" He looked up, wariness in his eyes. "I suppose. Have you ever been in love?" Isaiah's hands stilled in the dirt. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Once. A long time ago." "What happened?" "Her name was Sarah. She lived in Leadville with her family. I met her when I came down to trade one winter. She was beautiful and smart, and for some reason she liked me." He smiled sadly. "We courted for about 6 months. I thought maybe I could make a life work, split my time between the mountains and town, but then she told me I had to choose, the mountains or her." "And you chose the mountains," Eliza said softly. "I did. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I did, or thought I did, but I couldn't be someone I wasn't. I can't live in town, surrounded by people, working in a mine or a shop. This is who I am." He gestured at the mountains around them. "She deserved someone who could give her the life she wanted. I wasn't that person. Do you regret it?" Isaiah considered the question. "Sometimes I regret hurting her. But no, I don't regret my choice. It was the right one for both of us. She married a banker a year later. They have 3 children now, or so I heard." "And you never found anyone else?" "Never looked." Isaiah returned to digging carrots, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "What about you? You must have had suitors in Cripple Creek." Eliza laughed bitterly. "A few, but none I wanted. Most men looked at me like I was a workhorse they were considering buying, and after my parents died, the only attention I got was from men who knew Caleb owed money and thought I'd be desperate enough to marry them for protection." "Were you?" Isaiah asked. "Desperate enough?" "No, I'd rather have starved than married any of them." Eliza pulled up another potato plant, shaking the dirt from the roots. "My mother always told me to wait for a man who made me feel safe and seen. She said anything less wasn't worth having." "She sounds like she was wise." "She was." They worked in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. Eliza wanted to ask Isaiah how he felt about her, whether the attraction she felt was mutual, but she was afraid of the answer. If he rejected her, how could she continue living here, and where else could she go? That night, a storm rolled in. Eliza woke to the sound of thunder and rain hammering on the cabin roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating the loft in brief, brilliant bursts. She loved storms, but this one was fierce, and the wind howled around the cabin. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and she decided to climb down from the loft to make sure the fire hadn't gone out. As she reached the main room, another flash of lightning revealed Isaiah standing by the window, looking out into the storm. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He turned, and even in the darkness she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Storms make me restless. You?" "I wanted to check the fire." Isaiah moved to the fireplace and added another log to the embers, coaxing them back to life. Soon, a warm glow filled the room. They sat on opposite ends of the bench near the fire, watching the flames dance. "When I was little, I used to be afraid of storms," Eliza said. "My father would tell me stories during them to distract me. They always worked." "What kind of stories?" "Oh, all kinds. Adventures, mostly. Stories about explorers and pioneers. He had a great imagination." "Tell me one," Isaiah said. So Eliza did. She told him one of her father's stories about a trapper who befriended a grizzly bear and had adventures throughout the Rockies. It was silly and fantastical, but Isaiah listened intently, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When she finished, he said, "Your father would have liked it up here." "I think he would have. He always talked about the mountains like they were magical." "They are, in a way," Isaiah said. He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the firelight. "Eliza, I need to tell you something." Her heart started to race. "What is it?" Isaiah hesitated, clearly struggling with his words. "I need to apologize. When I brought you here, I told you that you didn't owe me anything, that you were free. But I've been selfish. Selfish how? I've been keeping you here because I don't want you to leave. I've gotten used to having you around, used to hearing your voice and your laughter. I look forward to our meals together, to working beside you. And that's not fair to you, because you deserve more than this isolated life with a mountain man who doesn't know how to live with people. Eliza's breath caught. Isaiah, do you want me to leave? No, he said vehemently. God, no. But I don't want you to stay just because you have nowhere else to go. You deserve a choice. I have a choice, Eliza said firmly. She moved closer to him on the bench, closing the distance between them. I choose to stay, not because I have to, but because I want to. Isaiah looked at her, his eyes searching her face. Why? Because I'm happy here. Because for the first time in my life, I feel free. Because you see me as a person, not as property or a burden. She paused, gathering her courage. And because I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Isaiah stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked like hope. Eliza, he said, his voice rough, you shouldn't love me. I'm difficult and solitary. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are what I need, she said. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength in his fingers. You're kind and brave and good. You saved me, not just from that auction, but from a life of fear and desperation. You've given me a home and treated me with respect. How could I not love you? Isaiah's hand tightened around hers. I've been fighting this since the day I met you, trying to keep my distance, trying not to cross a line. But Eliza, I've been losing that battle for weeks now. Then stop fighting, she whispered. Isaiah raised his free hand to her face, his palm cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. Are you sure? Because once I cross this line, I'm not going back. I'm not a man who does anything halfway. I'm sure. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Eliza didn't hesitate. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, almost reverent. But then she responded, pressing closer, and the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and she felt the strength in him, the barely leashed power. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Eliza Monroe, he said. I think I have since I saw you on that platform, looking so scared but so brave. I've never felt this way about anyone. Not even Sarah? Not even close. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. What I felt for Sarah was nothing compared to this. You're everything to me. They kissed again, and this time it was Eliza who deepened it, who let her hands explore the solid muscle of his shoulders and back. Isaiah groaned against her mouth, his control clearly fraying. We should stop, he said, though he made no move to pull away. We should do this properly. I should court you, marry you first. Are you asking me to marry you, Isaiah Hart? He pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. Yes. I know I don't have much to offer, just this cabin and a hard life in the mountains. But I'll spend every day of my life making sure you're happy and safe and loved. Will you marry me, Eliza? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Isaiah kissed her again, this time with a joy and passion that took her breath away. They stayed by the fire for hours, talking and kissing and planning their future. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, they were warm and safe, and happier than either of them had ever been. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean by the storm. Isaiah and Eliza ate breakfast together, stealing glances and smiles, still amazed by the shift in their relationship. We'll need to go to Cripple Creek or Leadville to get married properly, Isaiah said. Find a preacher. When? Eliza asked. Soon as possible. I don't want to wait. He grinned. Unless you want a big wedding with lots of people. Eliza laughed. No, just us and a preacher is perfect. They decided to wait a few weeks until Isaiah finished checking his trap lines and they had the cabin fully prepared for winter. In the meantime, they existed in a state of blissful anticipation. Isaiah was more open now, more willing to touch her, to hold her hand or wrap an arm around her waist. He kissed her often, each time with a reverence that made Eliza feel cherished. They spent their days working together and their evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Isaiah told her stories about growing up in the mountains with his father, about close calls with bears and mountain lions, about the beauty of the high country in winter. Eliza told him about her childhood, about her parents and the life they'd built in Cripple Creek. One afternoon, as they were splitting wood together, Isaiah said, "I've been thinking about the future, about what life will look like." "And," Eliza prompted, stacking the split logs, "I want children, lots of them. This cabin and these mountains feel like they should be full of life and laughter." He looked at her almost shyly. "How do you feel about that?" Eliza's heart swelled. "I want that too. I always imagined having a big family." Isaiah's smile was radiant. "Good. That's real good." They continued working, both of them imagining the future, the children they'd raise in this wild, beautiful place. When Isaiah's trap lines were checked and the cabin was ready for winter, they made the journey down to Leadville. It was a bigger town than Cripple Creek with more amenities and, importantly, a circuit preacher who came through regularly. They arrived to find that the preacher was in town, staying at the boarding house. Isaiah wasted no time seeking him out. The preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Thompson, agreed to marry them the next morning. "Do you have witnesses?" he asked. "We don't know anyone in town," Isaiah admitted. "No matter, we can find folks willing. It's not often I get to perform a wedding these days. Everyone's too busy chasing gold." That night, Isaiah rented a room for Eliza at the boarding house and slept in the stable with Ash. Eliza protested, but he insisted, "One more night won't kill us, and I want to do this right." The next morning, Eliza wore the best dress she had, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Isaiah had cleaned up, trimming his beard and tying his hair back. He wore a clean shirt and new pants he'd bought from the general store. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town. The witnesses were a shopkeeper and his wife, friendly strangers who smiled through the whole thing. Reverend Thompson kept it simple, talking about love and commitment and partnership. When he said, "You may kiss your bride," Isaiah pulled Eliza close and kissed her deeply, not caring that they had an audience. The shopkeeper's wife clapped and laughed. "Welcome to married life," Reverend Thompson said, shaking their hands. "May God bless you both." They had lunch at the boarding house, a celebratory meal of roast beef and potatoes, and then they started the journey home. Eliza rode behind Isaiah on Ash this time, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his broad back. When they reached the cabin as the sun was setting, Isaiah dismounted and then lifted Eliza down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her to the door. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "It's tradition, carrying your bride over the threshold." He kissed her nose. "I might not know much about proper society, but I know that much." He carried her inside and set her gently on her feet. The cabin looked the same as always, but somehow it felt different now. It was truly their home, the place where they'd build their life together. Isaiah closed the door and turned to her, his eyes dark with desire. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Eliza admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he said with a crooked smile. "I don't want to disappoint you." Eliza stepped close to him, placing her hands on his chest. "You could never disappoint me." He bent his head and kissed her, and this time there was no reason to hold back. They made their way to the bedroom, shedding clothes along the way. Isaiah was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Eliza felt nothing but pleasure. When they finally came together, it was with a rightness that felt inevitable, like two pieces fitting together perfectly. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Eliza's head on Isaiah's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you, Mrs. Hart," Isaiah said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too, Mr. Hart." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, completely content. The winter that followed was hard, as Isaiah had warned. The snow piled high, sometimes reaching the cabin's windows. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, completely cut off from the outside world. But Eliza found she didn't mind. She had everything she needed right there in the cabin. They spent the long winter days working on various projects. Isaiah carved wooden toys, explaining that they'd need them someday for children. Eliza sewed and knitted, creating warm clothes and blankets. They read from the small collection of books Isaiah had, taking turns reading aloud to each other by the fireplace. And they learned each other in ways both profound and simple. Isaiah learned that Eliza sang when she was happy, little melodies she made up as she worked. Eliza learned that Isaiah had a dry sense of humor that came out when he was relaxed. They made love often, each time learning more about what pleased the other, growing more comfortable and bold. One evening in deep winter, as a blizzard howled outside, they sat by the fire. Eliza had been feeling unwell for a few days, and Isaiah was worried. "Maybe we should try to get you to a doctor," he said, frowning. "In this weather? We'd never make it." Eliza smiled. "Besides, I think I know what's wrong with me." Isaiah's eyes widened. "You think you're pregnant?" "I do. I've missed my monthly courses and I've been nauseous in the mornings. My mother told me those were the signs." A slow grin spread across Isaiah's face. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully now, as if she might break. "When?" "I think sometime in early summer. July, maybe." Isaiah's joy was palpable. He spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about how they'd need to add on to the cabin, how he'd build a cradle. Eliza watched him, her heart full to bursting. This man who'd saved her from the auction block was going to be the father of her child. The pregnancy was not easy. As winter gave way to spring, Eliza's morning sickness grew worse. She could barely keep food down some days. Isaiah was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly checking on her, making sure she was comfortable. "I'm fine," she kept telling him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman, carrying my baby," he'd reply stubbornly. As Eliza's belly grew, Isaiah became more protective. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy or do any strenuous work. He did most of the chores himself, insisting she rest. In May, when the snow had finally melted and the trails were passable, Isaiah rode to the Ute camp to speak with a woman named Little Bird, who was known as a skilled midwife. He returned with her a few days later. Little Bird was a woman of about 40, with keen eyes and gentle hands. She examined Eliza and pronounced her healthy. "The baby is strong," she said through a mixture of English and hand gestures. "He will come when the flowers are highest." "He?" Eliza asked. "You think it's a boy?" Little Bird smiled and patted Eliza's belly. "I am rarely wrong." She stayed for a few days, teaching Isaiah what to do when the time came, showing him how to help. She also gave Eliza teas to help with the nausea and instructed her on exercises to prepare her body for birth. When Little Bird left, she promised to return when the baby was due. "Send your man when the pains start," she said. "I will come quickly." As July approached, Eliza grew more uncomfortable. The baby seemed to be taking up all the space inside her, making it hard to breathe and impossible to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Isaiah had finished the addition to the cabin, a new room for the baby with a beautiful hand-carved cradle. The pains started on a hot July morning. Eliza woke knowing immediately that today was the day. She shook Isaiah awake. "It's time. You need to go get Little Bird." Isaiah went pale. "I can't leave you alone." "You have to. I'll be fine for a few hours. The pains are still far apart." Reluctantly, Isaiah saddled Ash and rode out, pushing the horse as fast as he dared. Eliza spent the time walking around the cabin, trying to stay calm. The pains came in waves, growing closer together. Isaiah returned in record time with Little Bird, who took one look at Eliza and immediately took charge. "This baby is ready," she said. "It will be soon." She was right. Eliza's son was born just after sunset, a long, painful process that had Isaiah nearly as exhausted as Eliza by the end of it. But when Little Bird placed the baby in Eliza's arms, all the pain was forgotten. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and squalling with a shock of dark hair like his father's. "He's beautiful," Isaiah said, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out a large, calloused finger, and the baby immediately grasped it. "Look at that grip. He's going to be strong." "What should we name him?" Eliza asked. Isaiah thought for a moment. "What was your father's name?" "Daniel." "Then Daniel Hart he'll be, after the grandfather who would have loved him." Little Bird stayed for a few days to make sure both Eliza and the baby were healthy. She showed them how to care for him, how to swaddle him and soothe him. When she left, she squeezed Eliza's hand. "You have a good man and a good son. You are blessed." "I know," Eliza said, looking at Isaiah as he held Daniel with surprising gentleness for such a large man. I know I am. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong. He grew quickly, reaching for things and smiling by the time autumn arrived. Isaiah was a devoted father, carrying Daniel in a sling little bird had given them while he did chores, talking to the baby constantly. He needs to learn about the land, Isaiah explained when Eliza laughed at him narrating everything he did. That winter was easier than the last, despite having a baby. Daniel seemed to love the snow, staring at it in wonder when Isaiah took him outside for brief moments. They celebrated his first Christmas quietly, just the three of them, and Eliza thought she'd never been happier. As Daniel grew into a toddler, curious and adventurous, Isaiah built him toys and taught him about the animals and plants around them. The cabin echoed with the sound of Daniel's laughter and his attempts at words. When Daniel was 2, Eliza became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and wasn't as frightened. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Isaiah's mother, was born in the spring. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray-blue eyes. 2 perfect children, Isaiah said, holding Sarah while Daniel climbed on his lap. How did I get so lucky? We're both lucky, Eliza corrected, leaning against his shoulder. Life fell into a rhythm. The seasons turned, each bringing its own work and joys. Isaiah taught Daniel to fish and track animals. Eliza taught Sarah to cook and sew. The cabin they'd expanded grew full of love and laughter and life. When Daniel was 6 and Sarah was 4, Eliza gave birth to twins, boys they named Michael and Thomas. The cabin was chaotic with 4 young children, but Isaiah took it all in stride, building more additions, creating more space. We might need to build a whole compound at this rate, he joked after the twins were born. But they didn't have any more children after that. 4 was enough, they agreed. Their hands and their hearts were full. The years passed quickly. Daniel grew into a strong young man, tall like his father with the same quiet confidence. Sarah was bright and kind, always helping with her younger brothers. The twins were wild and adventurous, keeping everyone on their toes. Isaiah taught all his children about the mountains, about respecting the land and living in harmony with it. Eliza taught them to read and write, to think critically, to be kind. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children were finally asleep, Isaiah and Eliza sat outside the cabin, watching the stars. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked. Leaving your solitary life for all this chaos? Isaiah pulled her close, kissing her temple. Never, not once. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. He paused. Do you ever regret it? The hard life up here instead of something easier? Never, Eliza echoed. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. They sat in comfortable silence, the same silence they'd shared on their first night in the mountains, but different now, deeper, fuller. The silence of 2 people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. I used to think I saved you that day at the auction, Isaiah said after a while, but really, you saved me. You taught me how to live, not just survive. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just existing. You made this cabin into a home. Eliza turned to kiss him properly. We saved each other. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and eventually started families of their own. Daniel built a cabin nearby and married a Ute woman named Morning Sky, giving Isaiah and Eliza their first grandchildren. Sarah married a trader who respected her mountain upbringing and was willing to live near her family. The twins, inseparable as always, built a cabin together and eventually each found wives who could tolerate their wild ways. The valley that had once held only Isaiah's cabin now held a small settlement of Hart family homes. It wasn't a town exactly, but it was a community. They helped each other, celebrated together, grieved together. Isaiah and Eliza grew old gracefully, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving slower. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by years of partnership and mutual respect. On a warm summer evening, when Eliza was 64 and Isaiah was 69, they sat outside their cabin, watching their grandchildren play in the meadow. There were a dozen of them now, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Can you believe this all started because your fool brother sold you at an auction? Isaiah said, shaking his head. Eliza laughed. I wonder what happened to Caleb, if he ever made something of himself. They'd never heard from him again after that day in Cripple Creek. Eliza had let go of any anger toward him long ago. In a strange way, his terrible choice had led to the best life she could have imagined. "Doesn't matter," Isaiah said, taking her hand. "What matters is right here, our family, our life." "Our love," Eliza added. "That most of all." They watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, surrounded by the sounds of their family, their legacy. The livestock auction that could have been the worst day of Eliza's life had instead been the beginning of the best life she could have imagined, all because a mountain man with a good heart had paid double and told her brother to run. As darkness fell and the stars appeared, their grandchildren were called inside by their parents. Isaiah and Eliza remained outside a little longer, holding hands, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I love you, Eliza Hart," Isaiah said, as he had 1,000 times before. "I love you, Isaiah Hart," Eliza replied, as she would 1,000 times more. They went inside together, into the cabin Isaiah's father had built and Isaiah had expanded, into the home they'd filled with love and laughter and life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, they were simply together, and that was more than enough. In the end, theirs was a story of redemption and resilience, of two lonely souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. It was a story of the mountains in the Wild West, of hard work and harder winters, of love that grew stronger with each passing year. It was their story, and it was beautiful. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about how Grandma Eliza and Grandpa Isaiah met, they would tell the tale of the livestock auction, of the mountain man who'd paid double and told a coward to run. They'd tell about the journey into the mountains, about falling in love by firelight, about building a family in the wilderness. And the great-grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed, understanding that the love between their great-grandparents was something special, something that had shaped all their lives. They were all there, all 23 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because Isaiah Hart had been in Cripple Creek that July day in 1878, because he'd had the courage to do what was right, because he'd seen a woman in need and hadn't looked away. Isaiah and Eliza lived well into their 70s, eventually passing within months of each other, as longtime lovers often do. They were buried on a hill overlooking their valley, under a pair of aspen trees that turned gold every autumn. Their children and grandchildren made sure the graves were always tended, the stones always clean. And for generations after, the Hart family told the story of how it all began. The story of a woman sold at auction and a mountain man with a good heart. The story of a love that had started in darkness but had bloomed into something bright and lasting. The story of how one act of courage had changed everything. The cabin still stands, now over 100 years old, carefully maintained by the Hart descendants who still call the Colorado Mountains home. And if you visit on a quiet evening, when the stars are bright and the wind whispers through the pines, you can almost feel them there still. Isaiah and Eliza Hart, forever watching over the family and the land they loved. Their story became legend in the region, passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could emerge, that one person's courage could change the course of a life. That love, real love, could bloom in the most unexpected places. And so their legacy lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the very mountains themselves, in the values they'd instilled, in the community they'd built. The livestock auction that should have been Eliza's doom had instead been the first chapter in a remarkable love story, one that spanned decades and touched countless lives. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the hardship they had endured, not the struggles they had faced, but the love they had built and shared, the family they had created, the life they had lived together in the wild and beautiful mountains of Colorado. Their story was complete, their ending as happy as anyone could hope for. They'd lived long lives, seen their children and grandchildren thrive, and left behind a legacy of love and strength. And though they were gone, they were never forgotten. The Hart family made sure of that. Every year, on the anniversary of that fateful day in Cripple Creek, the family gathered at the cabin. They shared a meal, told stories, and raised a toast to Isaiah and Eliza, to the mountain man and the woman he'd saved, to the love that had conquered all obstacles, to the family that had sprung from one moment of courage and compassion. And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, It seemed almost as if Isaiah and Eliza were there with them still, watching over the family they'd created, the legacy they'd left. Their love story had ended, but its impact would continue for generations to come. That was the real happy ending. Not just that they'd found love, but that their love had created something lasting, something beautiful, something that would endure long after they were gone. The Hart family thrived in those mountains for generations, each one adding to the story, each one carrying forward the values Isaiah and Eliza had instilled: hard work, integrity, kindness, and above all, love. The kind of love that sacrifices, that protects, that endures. And it all started because a mountain man walked into a livestock auction in Cripple Creek, Colorado in the summer of 1878, saw an injustice, and decided to do something about it. Because he paid double and told a coward to run. Because he offered kindness instead of cruelty, protection instead of exploitation. Because sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the doorways to the best chapters we could ever imagine. And because love, when it's real and true and strong, can transform everything. That was the story of Isaiah and Eliza Hart. And it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. A perfect love story set in the Wild West with a happy ending that lasted not just a lifetime, but for generations. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure. And in the mountains of Colorado, where the aspens still turn gold and the stars still shine bright, their memory lives on forever.